Hi, I'm Zoe. 3 months ago, my dad handed me a shiny red car key and said, "Happy graduation, sweetheart. This is better than college anyway." Behind him sat a 1967 Ford Mustang convertible, cherry red with white racing stripes, gleaming in our driveway like some kind of trophy. The same car he'd bought with my entire college fund. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fund my grandmother Helen had started when I was born, adding money every birthday, every Christmas, every small milestone. 18 years of savings, gone in one afternoon of male vanity. But here's the thing about studying criminal psychology. Even informally, you learn that the most interesting cases aren't always the ones that make headlines. Sometimes they're sitting right in your own garage, revving their engine, and calling it love. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in our Beaverton home. Coffee brewing, Mom Linda rushing around in her scrubs before her nursing shift. My older brother Tyler already gone to his job at Dad's construction company. Dad sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, supposedly working on estimates for Brennan and Sons construction, but I could see the reflection of car listings in his reading glasses. "Zoe, come here for a second," he called without looking up from the screen. His voice carried that particular tone that meant he'd already made a decision and was just looking for validation. I poured myself coffee and sat across from him, noticing how he quickly minimized whatever window he'd been browsing. At 48, Marcus Brennan was what you'd call a man in transition. The gray creeping into his temples, the way he'd started wearing younger clothes, the sudden interest in classic rock music he'd never cared about before. Mom called it his fade. I was starting to recognize it as something else entirely. "Your college applications," he began, sliding a stack of papers toward me. "We need to talk about realistic expectations." The Pacific Northwest University acceptance letter sat on top, along with letters from 3 other schools, all acceptances. All requiring tuition that we'd supposedly been saving for since I was born. "Dad, we've been planning for this since I was little. Grandma Helen started the fund. You and Mom have been adding to it. The financial aid office said with our contribution, I'd only need minimal loans." He rubbed his temples, a gesture I'd seen more frequently lately. "Sweetheart, things change. The construction business has been rough, materials costs, labor shortages. We've had to dip into some savings just to keep the company afloat." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "How much did you have to use?" The pause stretched too long. "Most of it, most of it, most of it." My voice cracked higher than I intended. "Dad, that was 18 years of saving. Grandma Helen put her Social Security money into that account. She made me promise to use it for education, to be the first Brennan woman to graduate college. Your grandmother was a wonderful woman, but she didn't understand business realities." He closed the laptop with more force than necessary. "Besides, college isn't the only path to success. Look at Tyler. He's doing great working with me." Tyler, who spent most of his time hungover and had been fired from 2 other jobs before Dad gave him a position out of desperation. Tyler, who still lived in our basement and borrowed money from Mom for gas. "I want to study criminal psychology, Dad. I've wanted this since I was 15. I've already been accepted." "Psychology?" He laughed, but it wasn't kind. "Zoe, be realistic. You're 18 years old. You think you understand how the world works, but you don't. These colleges, they fill kids' heads with dreams and then saddle them with debt. You'll graduate with some useless degree and no real skills." The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing closer. "It's not useless to me. Look, I've been thinking about this a lot." He leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head like he was about to deliver great news. "What if we took a gap year? You could work with me at the company, learn the business. Real skills, real money. And who knows? Maybe by next year you'll see that college isn't all it's cracked up to be." I stared at him, searching his face for any sign that he understood what he was asking, that he grasped the magnitude of what he'd just destroyed. But all I saw was a man who'd convinced himself that his choices were everyone else's best option. That evening, I called my best friend Kira Wall. We'd been planning to be roommates at Pacific Northwest University, had already picked out our dorm decorations and planned our class schedules. "He can't just decide that for you," Kira said over FaceTime, her voice tight with indignation. "Zoe, that money wasn't his to spend on business expenses. That was your future. He keeps saying college is a waste, but I've seen his browser history, Kira. Classic car forums, auction sites, restoration videos. This isn't about the business being in trouble. This is about a middle-aged man having a crisis and deciding everyone else should pay for it. What does your mom say?" I sighed, staring at my acceptance letters spread across my desk. "She keeps telling me to give him time to come around, but how much time does he need to realize he stole from his own daughter?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma Helen, how she'd worked 2 jobs while raising 3 kids, how she'd saved every spare dollar so that someday a Brennan woman could do more than survive. She'd grown up during the Depression, understood the value of education in ways my dad seemed to have forgotten. I found myself in the garage at 2 in the morning, staring at Dad's workbench. Tools organized with military precision, receipts and invoices filed carefully in labeled folders. Marcus Brennan was nothing if not meticulous about his business records, which made his sudden financial crisis story even more suspicious. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I drove to Pacific Northwest University and walked into the financial aid office. "I need to understand my options," I told Mrs. Chin, the financial aid counselor who'd been helping me navigate the process. "My family situation has changed." She listened patiently as I explained about the college fund, the sudden business troubles, my dad's reluctance to support my education. When I finished, she pulled out a different set of forms. "Zoe, based on what you're telling me, you might qualify for additional aid as a student with limited family support. It's not easy, and you'd need to demonstrate financial independence, but it's possible." "What would that look like?" "You'd need your own income, your own housing, and you'd have to prove that your parents aren't providing substantial support. It's challenging, but I've seen students make it work." I thought about Tyler in the basement, about Dad's mysterious car browsing, about 18 years of Grandma Helen's quarters and dollar bills. What kind of income would I need? Part-time work could cover your living expenses if you're careful. There are also work-study programs, research assistant positions. For someone interested in criminal psychology, there might be opportunities with local law enforcement or social services. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than helplessness. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was possible. I could make this work without depending on someone who'd already proven he was willing to trade my future for his fantasy. That afternoon, I came home to find Dad in the garage, not working on construction estimates, but polishing something covered by a tarp. When he saw me, he pulled the cover back with the pride of a magician, revealing his greatest trick. The 1967 Ford Mustang convertible sat there like an accusation: cherry red paint job, white racing stripes, restored interior that probably cost more than my first year's tuition. It was beautiful, I had to admit. It was also the physical manifestation of every priority my father had chosen over my education. "What do you think?" He ran his hand along the hood like he was petting a beloved animal. "Isn't she gorgeous? Found her at an estate sale in Salem. The previous owner babied her for decades." I did the math quickly. Estate sale, professional restoration, new parts. This wasn't an impulse purchase. This was months of planning, months of choosing this car over my college fund, months of looking me in the eye and lying about business troubles. "How much did it cost, Dad?" "That's not really the point, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to invest in things that bring joy. Life's too short to drive boring cars and live boring lives. How much of my college fund is sitting in this garage right now?" His face changed. The enthusiastic car guy replaced by the defensive father who'd been caught. "Zoe, that's not fair. This isn't about you. My college fund became about me the day Grandma Helen started it. Every birthday check she gave me, she'd say, "This is for your education, Zoe, so you can be whatever you want to be." She died believing that money would send me to college. Your grandmother was a wonderful woman, but she didn't understand that the world has changed. College degrees don't guarantee anything anymore. Look at all the kids graduating with debt and no job. I looked at the car gleaming under the garage lights, and something clicked into place. The same methodical mind that had gotten me through advanced psychology courses and earned me early acceptance to university was now focused on a different kind of problem. You're right, Dad. The world has changed. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures of the Mustang, of the restoration receipts scattered on his workbench, of the classic car magazines stacked beside his coffee cup. And one of the things that's changed is how easy it is to document financial fraud. What are you talking about? I'm talking about a man who told his daughter her college fund was gone due to business troubles, while simultaneously spending that same money on a vintage car. I'm talking about someone who had no legal right to touch an educational fund that was specifically designated for his daughter's future. Dad's face went through several expressions before settling on uncomfortable anger. That money was in an account with my name on it. I had every right to make decisions about family finances. Actually, you didn't. I'd been researching this for weeks, ever since his first mention of financial troubles. Grandma Helen set up that account as a custodial account with specific educational purposes. There are legal protections around that kind of fund, especially when the beneficiary is about to reach the age of intended use. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that lying to your daughter about business troubles while spending her college money on a midlife crisis car is the kind of financial elder abuse and familial fraud that makes for fascinating case study. I also know that Pacific Northwest University has an excellent criminal psychology program where students often work on real cases. The garage fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent light. Dad stood frozen, one hand still resting on his precious car, finally understanding that his 18-year-old daughter might know more about consequences than he'd given her credit for. What are you saying, Zoe? I looked at him, this man who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with homework and had somehow convinced himself that stealing my future was an act of love. I'm saying that you've given me the perfect subject for my senior thesis, a case study in middle-aged male financial deviance, family manipulation, and the psychological factors that drive parents to sabotage their children's futures for personal gratification. You can't be serious. I'm very serious, Dad. And the beautiful thing about academic research is that it requires thorough documentation, financial records, timeline analysis, psychological evaluation of the subject's decision-making process, all completely legal, all completely academic. I walked toward the garage door, then turned back one more time. Oh, and Dad, I've already been accepted to Pacific Northwest University with financial aid that doesn't depend on you. Turns out when you tell the financial aid office that your parents refuse to support your education, there are programs designed exactly for students like me. The look on his face was worth 18 years of Grandma Helen's careful saving. It was the expression of a man who'd thought he was the smartest person in the room, only to discover he'd been playing chess with someone who understood the game better than he ever would. As I walked back toward the house, I could hear the engine of the Mustang roaring to life behind me. But for the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't the one running away. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of raised voices downstairs. Mom's shift didn't start until noon, which meant she and Dad were having one of their discussions that weren't really discussions at all. I could hear fragments through my bedroom floor. 18 years, Marcus. She's being dramatic. Your own daughter. I pulled on my robe and crept to the top of the stairs, not to eavesdrop exactly, but to gauge whether this was a conversation I needed to insert myself into, or one I should let them finish without my presence. She has a point about Helen's intentions, Mom was saying, her voice strained in that way it got when she was trying to be reasonable while also being furious. That money wasn't meant for your hobbies. It wasn't a hobby, Linda. It was an investment. Classic cars appreciate in value. College degrees depreciate the moment you graduate. I almost laughed out loud. Dad was now trying to spin his midlife crisis as financial planning. The man who couldn't balance his own business books was suddenly an investment advisor. An investment in what, exactly? Your Mom's voice was rising, which was unusual. Linda Brennan was typically the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and found middle ground. Hearing her this angry meant Dad had crossed a line even she couldn't rationalize away. I worked my ass off to build this company, to provide for this family. I think I deserve something that brings me joy after 30 years of construction sites and client complaints. At your daughter's expense. There was a long pause and I could picture Dad doing that thing where he rubbed his temples and sighed like he was the victim of everyone else's unreasonable expectations. She'll figure it out. Kids are resilient. She's smart enough to find another way. That's when I decided to join the conversation. I walked downstairs in my pajamas and robe, my hair still messy from sleep, and stood in the kitchen doorway. Mom was leaning against the counter, still in her scrubs from yesterday, looking exhausted. Dad sat at the table with his coffee, scrolling through his phone like this was just another morning. I did figure it out, I said quietly. Both of them turned to look at me. Mom's expression was sympathetic but tired. Dad's was defensive. Zoe, honey, your father and I were just talking about options for next year, Mom began, but I held up my hand. I know what you were talking about. I could hear you from upstairs. I walked to the coffee maker and poured myself a cup, taking my time, letting them wonder what I was going to say next. And I wanted to let you both know that I've already enrolled for fall semester at Pacific Northwest University. Dad's head snapped up from his phone. We talked about this. The money situation hasn't changed. You're right, the money situation hasn't changed. You still spent my college fund on a car, but my situation has changed. I sat down at the table across from him, cradling my coffee mug like armor. Turns out there are grants and programs specifically designed for students whose parents refuse to support their education. Amazing what you can accomplish when you stop waiting for someone else to care about your future. Mom straightened up. Zoe, what do you mean enroll? How are you paying for it? Financial aid work-study program, and a research assistant position with Dr. Patricia Vance in the criminal psychology department. She's particularly interested in my proposed thesis topic. The kitchen got very quiet. Dad set down his phone with deliberate care. What thesis topic? His voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Financial crime within family systems, specifically, how middle-aged men rationalize stealing from their children's futures to fund personal indulgences. Dr. Vance thinks it's a fascinating area of study, especially with a real-time case subject. Dad's face went through several shades of red. You can't be serious about this academic nonsense. It's not nonsense, Dad. It's research. Completely legitimate, completely legal, and completely fascinating from a psychological perspective. I took a sip of coffee, watching him process this information. Dr. Vance says that family financial abuse is one of the most understudied areas in criminal psychology, because victims rarely have the resources or knowledge to document it properly. This isn't abuse, Zoe. This is a family making difficult financial decisions. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. Would you mind if I recorded your explanation of those difficult financial decisions? For my research notes, of course. The color drained from his face. Turn that off. Why? If your decisions were sound and ethical, shouldn't you be comfortable explaining them on record? Mom stepped between us, her hands raised like she was trying to prevent a collision. Okay, everyone needs to take a breath here. Zoe, put the phone away. Marcus, you need to listen to what your daughter is saying. What I'm hearing, Dad said, standing up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor, is threats and manipulation. She's trying to blackmail me with some college project. I'm not blackmailing anyone. I kept my voice calm, professional even. I'm studying criminal psychology, and you've provided me with a perfect case study. The fact that you're interpreting academic research as a threat is actually quite revealing from a psychological standpoint. That's enough. Dad's voice was getting louder, which historically meant the conversation was about to end with him storming out and everyone else walking on eggshells for days. But I wasn't 18-year-old Zoe who backed down from conflict anymore. I was 18-year-old Zoe who had spent 3 weeks researching financial aid, educational law, and psychological research methods. You know what's enough, Dad? Enough is spending 18 years watching Grandma Helen put money away for my education, while planning to steal it for your personal entertainment. Enough is lying to my face about business troubles while shopping for classic cars. Enough is expecting me to just accept that my future doesn't matter as much as your feelings. I stood up, matching his energy but not his volume. But what's really enough is me pretending this is normal family behavior instead of recognizing it for what it actually is. And what is it exactly? His voice was dangerously quiet now. Financial abuse with psychological manipulation elements, paternal authority used to justify theft, classic narcissistic rationalization patterns. I recited the terms like I was reading from a textbook, which in a way, Dr. Vance is particularly interested in how perpetrators convince themselves they're actually helping their victims. Dad stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to decide whether to escalate this further or retreat. The fact that he was calculating his response instead of immediately defending his actions told me everything I needed to know about his awareness of what he'd done. "You're making a mistake, Zoe," he said finally. "College is going to fill your head with theories and terminology that have nothing to do with real life. Real families don't operate according to psychology textbooks." "Maybe not," I agreed, "but real families also don't steal from their children and call it love." That afternoon, I drove to Pacific Northwest University for my meeting with Dr. Patricia Vance. The campus was buzzing with summer session students and incoming freshmen getting oriented. I found her office in the psychology building, a cluttered space filled with research books, case files, and the kind of academic chaos that felt like home to me. Vance was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the slightly distracted air of someone who thought about criminal behavior more than was probably healthy. "Zoe, please sit down." She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "I've been thinking about your research proposal since we spoke on the phone. It's ambitious for an undergraduate thesis, but the personal element could provide insights that traditional case studies miss. I want to be clear that I'm not doing this for revenge. I mean, I'm angry obviously, but this is legitimate academic interest. I've been fascinated by criminal psychology since high school, and this situation has given me a unique perspective on financial crime within families." "Tell me more about that perspective." I spent the next hour explaining the timeline of events, the patterns of behavior I'd observed, and the psychological elements that seemed most relevant to study. Vance took notes, asked probing questions, and occasionally looked up with the expression of someone who was seeing familiar patterns in a new context. "What you're describing aligns with several areas of current research," she said finally. "Familial financial abuse, certainly, but also the psychology of midlife crisis behaviors, and how financial stress can trigger regression to adolescent decision-making patterns." "Regression?" "Your father's behavior, spending impulsively on status symbols while avoiding responsibility for consequences. That's textbook adolescent psychology. It's not uncommon in middle-aged men who feel they've missed out on something in their youth." I thought about Dad polishing his car, the way he talked about it like it represented freedom and excitement rather than theft and selfishness. "So this isn't just about the money." "Money is rarely just about money," Dr. Vance said. "It's about power, control, identity, self-worth. Your father didn't just take your college fund. He took your future and traded it for his past." That evening, I sat in my room, organizing my research materials, financial documents, timeline of events, copies of communications with the university, photos of the car and related receipts. It was starting to look like a real investigation, which was both satisfying and slightly surreal. Kira called while I was reviewing my notes from the meeting with Dr. Vance. "How did it go with the professor?" she asked. "Really well. She thinks the research angle is solid, and she's agreed to supervise the project. I'm officially enrolled for fall semester with enough financial aid to cover tuition and basic living expenses." "That's amazing. Your dad must be freaking out. He's trying to pretend it's not happening." Mom's caught in the middle, which is typical, but Kira, the more I research this stuff, the more I realize how messed up the whole situation really is. "What do you mean?" I explained what Dr. Vance had told me about regression patterns and identity crisis behavior. "It's not just that he spent my college money, it's that he convinced himself he had the right to do it, that somehow his need for a midlife crisis car was more important than my education. Have you told him about the research project? I've hinted at it. I think he's starting to understand that I'm not just going to disappear quietly and let him pretend this never happened. Good. Someone needs to hold him accountable. After we hung up, I found myself thinking about accountability and what it actually meant. Was I trying to punish my father, or was I trying to understand him? Was there a difference? I opened my laptop and started typing my first research note. Subject: exhibits classic signs of midlife identity crisis, manifesting in financially irresponsible behavior, justified through elaborate rationalization system. Subject appears to view family resources as extensions of personal property, despite legal and ethical obligations to respect designated purposes of funds. It felt strange to write about my own father in clinical terms, but it also felt clarifying. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a case study in human behavior, a way to understand not just what had happened, but why it had happened and how to prevent it from happening to other families. The next morning, I woke up to find Dad already gone and Mom drinking coffee alone in the kitchen. She looked like she hadn't slept well. "How are you feeling about all this?" she asked when I joined her at the table. Which part? The theft, the lies, or the fact that I had to figure out my own future because my parents couldn't be trusted to protect it? Mom flinched. "Zoe, that's not fair. Your father isn't a bad man, he's just going through something right now." "Mom, I love you, but going through something doesn't excuse stealing from your child. If a stranger took 18 years of my college savings to buy a car, you'd call the police." "Why is it different because he's my father?" "Because families work things out differently than strangers do." "Do they? Or do families just enable bad behavior because it's easier than holding people accountable?" Mom was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee like it might contain answers. "Your grandmother would be proud of you," she said finally. "Helen always said you had the strongest sense of justice of anyone she knew." Grandma Helen also trusted that the money she saved would actually go to my education. She died believing that Dad would honor her wishes. "He's not a monster, Zoe. I never said he was, but he's not the victim here either, no matter how much he wants to act like one." That afternoon, I got a call from Tyler. My brother rarely called me directly, preferring to communicate through Mom or not at all, so I knew this was either very important or very awkward. "Dad's pretty upset about this college thing," he said without preamble. "Which college thing? The part where he stole my tuition money, or the part where I found a way to go anyway?" "Come on, Zoe, don't be dramatic. He's trying to do what's best for the family." "Tyler, he spent my college fund on a car. How is that what's best for me?" "Maybe college isn't the right choice for everyone. Look at me, I'm doing fine without a degree." I almost laughed. Tyler was 23, lived in our parents' basement, and had been fired from every job he'd ever had, except the one Dad gave him out of desperation. "You're working for Dad because no one else will hire you. That's not the same as being successful. That's harsh even for you."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It's honest. And honestly, Tyler, I'm tired of pretending that this family's dysfunction is normal just because it's what we're used to. What's that supposed to mean? It means that normal fathers don't steal from their daughters' futures. Normal families don't enable financial abuse and call it love. Normal people don't expect their victims to be grateful for being screwed over. There was a long pause, and I could hear Tyler breathing heavily like he was trying to decide whether to hang up or escalate. "Dad wants to talk to you," he said finally. "Dad knows where I live. If he wants to talk, he can come talk. But if he's expecting an apology or for me to drop out of school to make him feel better about what he did, he's going to be disappointed. He thinks you're trying to embarrass the family." "I'm trying to get an education despite my family. There's a difference." That evening, I was in my room working on research notes when I heard the Mustang pull into the driveway. Dad's evening joyride, his daily reminder to himself and everyone else that his happiness mattered more than anyone else's future. A few minutes later, there was a knock on my bedroom door. "Come in," Dad entered carefully, like he was approaching a dangerous animal. He sat on the edge of my desk chair, not quite facing me. We need to talk. Okay, this research project, this thesis idea, you need to drop it. I looked up from my laptop. Why? Because it's vindictive and it's going to hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt. Like me? That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? Because from where I'm sitting, the only person who's been hurt so far is me. You're the one who took something that didn't belong to you. I'm the one trying to rebuild what you destroyed. Dad rubbed his temples, his go-to gesture for avoiding difficult conversations. Zoe, I know you're angry, but you're young. You don't understand all the factors that go into family financial decisions. I understand that you stole my college fund to buy a toy. I didn't steal anything. That money was in an account with my name on it. Money that Grandma Helen, specifically, designated for my education. Money that you had no moral or legal right to use for personal purchases. Legal right? His voice was getting harder. I'm your father. I have the legal right to make decisions about this family's finances. I turned my laptop screen toward him. Actually, you don't. I've been researching educational trusts and custodial accounts. There are specific legal protections for designated educational funds, especially when the beneficiary is approaching college age. His face went pale. You've been researching what? Laws about financial abuse within families, educational trust violation, fraud committed against minors by their guardians. I recited the terms calmly, watching his expression change with each phrase. It's fascinating how many legal protections exist that people just don't know about. Zoe, you're in dangerous territory here. And because from my research, it seems like you're the one in dangerous territory. I'm just studying it. He stood up abruptly, pacing to my window and back. You can't be serious about pursuing this. Why not? It's legitimate academic research on an important topic. Vance thinks it could contribute meaningful insights to the field. Because it's our family, Zoe. Because some things should stay private. Like theft, like complicated family situations that outsiders won't understand. I closed my laptop and looked at him directly. Dad, the only thing complicated about this situation is the mental gymnastics you've done to convince yourself that stealing from your daughter is somehow an act of love. I never said it was an act of love. Then what was it? He was quiet for a long time, staring out my window at the driveway where his precious Mustang sat, gleaming under the porch light. It was a mistake, he said finally. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk at the store. This was a choice, a series of choices. You chose to browse car listings, instead of discussing college finances with me. You chose to attend car auctions, instead of meeting with financial aid counselors. You chose to spend my future on your fantasy. I can make this right. How? Another long pause. I could sell the car. I almost laughed. Dad, you can't sell that car for what you paid for it. Classic car investments don't work that way, especially when you overpaid at an estate sale and then spent thousands more on restoration. Then what do you want from me? It was a fair question, and one I'd been thinking about for weeks. What did I want? An apology? Impossible. The money back? Impractical. For him to understand what he'd done? Unlikely. I want you to stop pretending you're the victim here, I said finally. I want you to acknowledge that you made a selfish choice that hurt me, and I want you to leave me alone while I clean up the mess you made of my future. And this research project, the research project is happening regardless of what you want. I'm studying criminal psychology, and you've given me a perfect case study in family financial crime. That's not vindictive, Dad. That's academic. He stood there for another moment, looking like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't figure out what. Finally, he walked to my door. This isn't over, Zoe. You're right, I agreed. It's not, but the next part is my choice, not yours. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in my first criminal psychology seminar when my phone started buzzing incessantly. Vance was explaining the psychological profiles of white-collar criminals when I felt the vibrations against my leg. One buzz, then another, then a steady stream that meant someone was either having an emergency or a meltdown. I glanced at the screen under my desk. 7 missed calls from Mom, 3 from Tyler, and one from a number I didn't recognize. My stomach clenched. In our family, this many calls usually meant someone was either in the hospital or in jail. After class, I found a quiet corner of the psychology building and called Mom back. "Zoe, thank God." Her voice was strained, barely controlled. "Where have you been?" "In class, Mom. It's Tuesday morning. Where else would I be? You need to come home. Right now." The tone in her voice made my blood run cold. "What happened? Is someone hurt?" "Your father's been arrested." I felt the world tilt slightly sideways. Arrested for what? Financial fraud. Something about business accounts and missing money. The police came to the house this morning with a warrant. They took his computer, his phone, boxes of files from his office. I closed my eyes, trying to process this information. "Mom, what kind of financial fraud?" "I don't know all the details. Something about client deposits that weren't properly handled, construction projects that were paid for but never completed. They're saying he might have been running some kind of scheme for months." My mind immediately went to Dad's claims about business troubles, his explanation for why my college fund had to be sacrificed to keep Brennan and Sons afloat. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. "Where is he now?" "Downtown jail. They're holding him pending arraignment." "Zoe, I need you to come home. Tyler's completely useless, and I don't know what to do." I looked around the psychology building at students discussing case studies and research projects, at the normal academic world I'd fought so hard to access. "I'll be there in an hour." The drive home felt surreal. My father, who'd spent 18 years lecturing me about responsibility and making good choices, was sitting in a jail cell for financial crime. The man who'd insisted that college was a waste of money because real life required practical skills had apparently been practicing fraud instead of construction. I found Mom in the kitchen, surrounded by legal documents and looking about 10 years older than she had the week before. Tyler sat across from her, staring at his phone like it might provide answers. "Tell me everything," I said, sitting down at the table that had become our family crisis center. Mom slid a folder toward me. "The detective left these copies. Apparently there have been complaints for months. Clients who paid deposits for construction projects that were never started, subcontractors who weren't paid for work they completed, materials that were billed to clients but never delivered to job sites." I opened the folder and started reading. The timeline of alleged crimes stretched back almost 2 years. Long before Dad's supposed sudden financial crisis, long before my college fund disappeared into a classic car. "This says he was taking client deposits and using them to pay for personal expenses instead of project materials," I said, scanning the police report. "That's impossible," Tyler said without looking up from his phone. "Dad's not a criminal. He's just bad at bookkeeping." I kept reading. The amounts were staggering. Tens of thousands of dollars in client money that had been diverted to personal accounts. The pattern was clear and deliberate, not the result of poor bookkeeping, but systematic theft. "Mom, did you know about any of this?" "Of course not." She looked offended that I'd even ask. "I handle the household finances, but the business accounts are all Marcus. I trusted him to handle that side of things." I thought about trust, about how many people had trusted my father with their money, their construction projects, their future. How many families had paid him deposits for work that would never be completed while he shopped for vintage cars. "Have you talked to a lawyer?" I called Jim Morrison. You know, the family attorney who handled Grandma Helen's estate. "He says we need a criminal defense attorney, not a family lawyer." "How much is that going to cost?" Mom's face crumpled slightly. "More than we have, especially if the business accounts are frozen." I felt a familiar cold weight settling in my stomach. "Mom, how bad is this financially? I mean, apart from Dad being in jail." "I don't know yet. The police froze all the business accounts pending investigation. If Marcus really did what they're saying, if he used client money for personal expenses, we could lose everything. The house, the business, our savings." "What savings?" The question came out sharper than I intended. "What do you mean?" "Mom, there are no savings. Dad spent my college fund on a car, remember? And now we find out he's been stealing client money for 2 years. What exactly did you think he was saving?" Tyler finally looked up from his phone. "Zoe, don't be a bitch. Mom's going through enough right now. I'm not being a bitch, Tyler. I'm being realistic. Dad has been lying to all of us about money for years. The college fund was just the beginning. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice memo app. Mom, I need you to think carefully about this. When did Dad first mention business troubles? When did he first say money was tight? I don't understand why you're recording this. Because I'm working on a research project about financial crime within families, and this situation just became a lot more relevant to my studies. Mom stared at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. Zoe, this isn't research. This is our family falling apart. This is our family finally being honest about what's been happening for years. I kept the recording app open. When did Dad first mention financial problems? Maybe 6 months ago. He said materials costs were going up, that some clients were slow to pay. 6 months ago. That's right around the time he started shopping for classic cars online. I looked at Tyler. Did he ever mention money problems at work? Not really. I mean, he'd complain about costs and stuff, but he always complained about something. But he never mentioned missing client payments or unpaid subcontractors. No, I turned back to Mom. So he was telling you that money was tight because of business troubles, but he wasn't mentioning the business troubles to his employee. That's interesting. What are you getting at, Zoe? I'm getting at the fact that Dad's been lying to all of us about money for a lot longer than just the college fund situation. He's been running a fraud scheme while telling his family that legitimate business expenses were causing financial strain. Mom looked exhausted. What does it matter now? He's in jail, the business is ruined, and we might lose everything. It matters because it establishes a pattern of deception and financial abuse that goes beyond just my college money. It matters because there are other victims here, and they deserve to know the truth. Other victims. I gestured to the police reports, the families who paid him deposits for construction projects they'll never get, the workers who completed jobs but never got paid, the suppliers who delivered materials they'll never be compensated for. Those are business disputes, not family matters. They're crimes, Mom, and the money Dad used to commit those crimes, some of it was supposed to be mine. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and Tyler's aggressive thumb type. I could see Mom trying to process the magnitude of what was happening, the way her world was reshaping itself around information she'd never wanted to know. What happens now? She asked finally. Now we find out how deep this goes. Now we figure out what's left after Dad finishes destroying everything he touches. That evening, I drove back to my apartment near campus with a box of financial documents Mom had asked me to look through. She seemed to think that because I was studying criminal psychology, I might be able to make sense of Dad's bookkeeping in ways that a normal person couldn't. She wasn't wrong, but not for the reasons she thought. I spread the papers across my small dining table and started organizing them chronologically: bank statements, client contracts, receipts, invoices. The story they told was uglier than I'd expected. Dad had been systematically stealing from clients for nearly 2 years, taking their deposits, and using the money to fund an increasingly expensive lifestyle. The classic car was just the most obvious purchase. There were also restaurant charges, vacation expenses, electronic equipment, and dozens of smaller purchases that added up to a comprehensive pattern of financial deception. But the most damning evidence was in the timeline. The first fraudulent charges appeared almost exactly 18 months ago, right around the time Grandma Helen had made her final contribution to my college fund. Dad hadn't just stolen from clients, he'd been planning to steal from me for over a year. I pulled out my laptop and opened a new document. If I was going to turn this into legitimate academic research, I needed to approach it systematically. Timeline analysis, financial deception in family systems. I typed at the top of the page. Subject began systematically diverting client funds, approximately 18 months prior to arrest. Initial diversions coincide with subject's awareness of large college fund balance available for personal use. Pattern suggests premeditated financial abuse across multiple victim categories: family members, business clients, and subcontractors. It felt strange to write about my own family's destruction in academic language, but it also felt clarifying. This wasn't just personal drama anymore. It was a case study in how financial crimes escalate and expand when left unchecked. My phone rang while I was organizing receipts. Kira's name flashed on the screen. Holy shit, Zoe. I just saw the news. Is it true about your dad? The arrest, the fraud charges, or the fact that he's been lying to everyone about money for years? All of it. This is insane. Are you okay? I looked around my small apartment, at the financial documents spread across my table, at the research materials for a thesis project that had suddenly become a lot more complex and personal than I'd anticipated. I'm fine, better than fine actually. This whole situation just became the perfect case study for my criminal psychology thesis. Zoe, that's kind of dark even for you. Or is it the logical response to discovering that your father is a criminal who's been lying to your family for years, while destroying other people's lives? When you put it that way, Kira, he didn't just steal my college money. He stole it as part of a larger pattern of stealing from everyone who trusted him. Families who hired him for construction projects, workers who counted on him for paychecks. My grandmother's memory. What do you mean about your grandmother? I pulled out the timeline I'd been constructing. Grandma Helen made her last contribution to my college fund 18 months ago, right before she died. Dad started stealing from clients 18 months ago. He didn't just take my future, Kira. He took her final gift and used it as seed money for a criminal enterprise. That's really fucked up. It's also really interesting from a research perspective. How does someone rationalize stealing from their dying mother's final gift to their granddaughter? What kind of psychological framework allows that level of self-deception? Are you going to be okay financially? I mean, if your family loses everything. I'm fine. I've been planning for financial independence since the college fund disappeared. I have scholarships, financial aid, and a research assistantship. I don't need anything from them anymore. And your mom? That was the harder question. Mom wasn't a criminal, just someone who'd trusted the wrong person with her financial security. She'd spent 30 years believing that her husband was responsible and honest, only to discover that he'd been systematically destroying their future while she worked double shifts to support the family. Mom's going to have to figure out how to rebuild without him. But maybe that's not the worst thing that could happen. The next morning I had a meeting with Dr. Vance to discuss how my research project had suddenly become a lot more complex. I brought the financial documents and the timeline I'd constructed, along with copies of the police reports Mom had shared. Dr. Vance listened carefully as I explained the new developments, taking notes, and occasionally asking clarifying questions. This is certainly more complex than we initially anticipated, she said when I finished, but it's also potentially more valuable from a research perspective. You now have access to documentation of financial crimes across multiple victim categories, all perpetrated by the same individual. Is it ethical for me to use this information academically? I mean, these are real crimes with real victims. That's a good question. The key is ensuring that your research contributes to understanding and prevention, rather than exploitation. Can you frame this in a way that helps other families recognize and prevent similar patterns of abuse? I thought about all the families who'd trusted Dad with their money, all the workers who'd completed jobs without getting paid, all the people whose lives had been disrupted by his selfishness and greed. I think so. If I can identify the warning signs and escalation patterns, maybe other people won't get hurt the way we did. Then this could be very valuable research. But Zoe, you need to be prepared for the personal cost. Analyzing your father's crimes in academic detail is going to be emotionally challenging. More challenging than discovering that my father is a criminal who's been lying to me my entire life. Dr. Vance smiled grimly. Fair point. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a woman's voice asked, "Is this Zoe Brennan?" "Yes, my name is Sarah Martinez. I'm a reporter with the Portland Tribune. I'm working on a story about your father's arrest, and I was hoping I could ask you a few questions." My first instinct was to hang up, but then I thought about all the victims who deserved to have their stories told. What kind of questions? I'm particularly interested in the timeline of his alleged crimes, and whether family members were aware of any financial irregularity. I looked at the documents spread across my table, at the timeline I'd constructed, at the evidence of systematic deception that stretched back years. Martinez, I think you should know that I'm a criminal psychology student at Pacific Northwest University, and I've been researching financial crimes within family systems. My father's case has become part of my academic work. Really? That's fascinating. Would you be willing to discuss your research findings? I thought about Dad sitting in a jail cell, probably still convinced that he was the victim of everyone else's unreasonable expectation. I thought about Mom trying to figure out how to rebuild her life after 30 years of trusting the wrong person. I thought about all the families who'd paid deposits for construction work they'd never receive. Ms. Martinez, I think we should definitely talk. The Portland Tribune article came out 3 days later with the headline, "Local construction company owner faces multiple fraud charges, daughter studies his crimes for college thesis." Sarah Martinez had done her homework, interviewing not just me but several of Dad's victims, former employees, and even Dr. Vance, about the academic value of studying financial crimes within family systems. The article was fair but devastating. It detailed the scope of Dad's alleged crimes, the impact on local families who'd trusted him with their construction projects, and the psychological analysis I was conducting as part of my criminal psychology studies. What made it particularly damning was the timeline Martinez had constructed, showing how Dad's personal purchases escalated alongside his theft from business clients. I was in my apartment reading the online version when my phone started ringing. Mom's number appeared on the screen. "Zoe, have you seen the newspaper? I'm reading it now. How could you do this to us? How could you talk to a reporter about family business?" I felt the familiar weight of being blamed for consequences I hadn't created. "Mom, this isn't family business anymore, it's criminal business. Dad committed crimes against multiple families, and those families deserve to know the truth. But talking to the media, making our private problems public, our private problems stopped being private the moment Dad was arrested for financial fraud. The newspaper was going to write about this, regardless of whether I talked to them. At least this way, the story includes information about how financial crimes affect families, and how to recognize warning signs." The phones haven't stopped ringing. Neighbors, friends, people from church. Everyone wants to know if we knew what Marcus was doing. "What are you telling them? The truth, that we had no idea." I thought about the timeline I'd constructed, the months of Dad claiming business troubles while shopping for classic cars, the way he'd isolated financial decision-making from the rest of the family. "Mom, that is the truth. Dad went to great lengths to keep everyone in the dark about what he was really doing. That's part of how these crimes work. The perpetrator maintains control by limiting other people's access to information." "You sound like a textbook. I am studying this academically. And Mom, the research I'm doing might help other families avoid what we've been through." There was a long pause, and I could hear Mom breathing heavily like she was trying to decide whether to hang up or keep talking. "Your father called from jail," she said finally. "What did he say?" "He's angry about the newspaper article. He says you're destroying the family's reputation to get attention for your college project." I almost laughed. Our family's reputation was destroyed the moment he decided to steal money from clients to buy a midlife crisis car. "I'm just documenting what happened. He wants to see you, I'm sure he does. Will you visit him?" I looked around my apartment, at the research materials spread across my dining table, at the timeline of financial crimes that had fundamentally altered my understanding of my own family. The man sitting in jail had spent 2 years systematically lying to everyone who trusted him, stealing from clients while claiming business troubles, and using my grandmother's final gift as seed money for his criminal enterprise. "Why would I visit him, Mom?" "Because he's your father. Being my father didn't stop him from stealing my future. Being your husband didn't stop him from lying to you for years. Being trusted by his clients didn't stop him from taking their money. Why should being family matter now when it never mattered to him?" "Zoe, that's harsh. It's honest." "And Mom, honest."
I think you deserve better than spending your life making excuses for someone who's been betraying your trust for years. After we hung up, I sat staring at my laptop screen, at the newspaper article that had made our family's destruction public. Part of me felt guilty about talking to the reporter, but a larger part felt relieved that the truth was finally out in the open. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jennifer Walsh, one of your dad's clients. I saw the newspaper article. Would you be willing to talk?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "What would you like to discuss?" "My family paid your father $15,000 for a kitchen renovation 6 months ago. We never heard from him again after the deposit cleared. I'd like to know if there's any way to get our money back." I thought about the frozen business accounts, the legal fees Mom couldn't afford, the complexity of recovering funds from someone who'd systematically spent other people's money on personal luxuries. "I'm not a lawyer, but I can share what I've learned about the legal process. Would you like to meet for coffee?" "Yes." "And Miss Brennan, thank you for talking to the newspaper." My husband didn't want to believe that someone could just take our money and disappear, but seeing the pattern laid out in the article helped him understand that this wasn't our fault. That afternoon, I met Jennifer Walsh at a coffee shop near campus. She was probably Mom's age, with tired eyes and the kind of controlled composure that comes from dealing with a crisis you never saw coming. "We saved for 2 years for that kitchen renovation," she told me over coffee and muffins. Neither of us was really eating. "It was supposed to be our 20th anniversary gift to ourselves. I'm sorry this happened to your family. It's not your fault, but I wanted to ask you about something the newspaper article mentioned. About recognizing warning signs. Looking back, were there things that should have made us more cautious?" I pulled out my notebook, the one where I'd been documenting patterns and behaviors for my research project. "From what I've learned studying this case, there are several red flags that victims often don't recognize until afterward. Pressure to pay large deposits up front, reluctance to provide detailed written contracts, vague timelines for project completion, and isolation of financial communication to one person instead of involving the whole business team." Jennifer nodded grimly. "All of those." He insisted on cash for the deposit. Said it would help him get better prices on material. He wouldn't give us a firm start date, just kept saying soon whenever we asked. "Did he ever mention financial troubles with the business?" "Actually, yes. He said materials costs were going up, and some clients had been slow to pay, so he needed our deposit to secure supplies for our project." I made notes while she talked. The pattern was becoming clearer with each victim I spoke to. Dad had developed a systematic approach to fraud, using claims of business troubles to justify unusual payment demands, while presenting himself as a trustworthy family man who understood construction. "Miss Brennan, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. How are you handling this emotionally? I mean, discovering that your father is a criminal can't be easy, even if you're studying it academically." It was a fair question, and one I'd been avoiding thinking about too deeply. Honestly, the academic framework helps. When I approach this as a research subject instead of a personal betrayal, it's easier to maintain emotional distance, but it is a personal betrayal. Yes, but it's also a learning opportunity. If I can understand how and why this happened, maybe I can help prevent it from happening to other families. That's very mature of you. Or very detached. I'm not sure there's a difference anymore. That evening, Dr. Vance called to discuss the media attention my research was receiving. "I've had several calls from other universities asking about your work," she said. "There's significant academic interest in your approach to studying financial crimes, from the victim's perspective. Is that good, or bad?" "It's good for your research credibility, but it also means increased scrutiny. Are you prepared for that level of academic attention?" I thought about Dad sitting in jail, probably still convinced that everyone else was wrong about his choices. I thought about Mom trying to rebuild her life after 30 years of trusting someone who'd been systematically betraying that trust. I thought about families like the Walshes, who'd saved for years for home improvements they'd never receive. "Vance, if my research can help people understand how these crimes develop and how to protect themselves, then I'm prepared for whatever scrutiny comes with that." "Good, because I think your work could contribute significantly to the field. But Zoe, you need to be prepared for pushback from your family. Academic objectivity about personal trauma can be perceived as cold or disloyal. My family perceives everything I do as disloyal if it doesn't involve protecting Dad from the consequences of his choice. I stopped worrying about their perception of loyalty when I realized their definition of family loyalty involved enabling financial abuse. The next morning, I was surprised to find Tyler waiting outside my apartment building when I left for class. "We need to talk," he said without preamble.
About what?
"About you destroying the family for your stupid college project." I looked at my brother, 23 years old and still completely dependent on our parents for housing, employment, and basic life skills. The idea that he was lecturing me about destroying the family would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. "Tyler, I didn't destroy anything. Dad destroyed it when he decided to steal money from clients to fund his midlife crisis. He made some mistakes, but families are supposed to stick together. Where was that family loyalty when he was spending my college fund on a car? Where was it when he was lying to Mom about business troubles while stealing from clients? That's different." "How is it different?" Tyler shifted uncomfortably, like he was trying to remember talking points someone else had given him. "He's still our father. He made some bad choices, but turning him into some kind of criminal case study is fucked up. He is a criminal, Tyler. He's been charged with multiple felonies. The case study part is just me trying to understand how someone gets to the point where they think stealing from their family and clients is acceptable. You're embarrassing all of us." "I'm telling the truth. If the truth is embarrassing, maybe the problem isn't with me telling." Tyler was quiet for a moment, staring at the ground like it might provide better arguments than the ones he'd prepared. "Mom's having a really hard time with all this," he said finally. "I know she is, and I'm sorry about that. But Tyler, Mom's problems started long before I talked to any reporters. They started when Dad decided to lie to her about money for 2 years while stealing from clients." "So what? You're just going to abandon the family?" "I'm going to continue my education and my research. If the family wants to be part of my life, they need to stop expecting me to pretend that financial abuse is normal." "Financial abuse? Jesus, Zoe, you sound like a social worker." "I sound like someone who's studied criminal psychology and recognizes patterns of harmful behavior." "Tyler, Dad didn't just steal money, he systematically lied to everyone who trusted him, including you. He gave me a job when no one else would. He gave you a job because you're family and he knew you wouldn't ask hard questions about how he was running the business." "That's not generosity, Tyler. That's complicity insurance." My brother's face went through several expressions before settling on confused anger. "I don't know what that means." "It means he kept you close and dependent so you wouldn't notice or report the illegal things he was doing. You were his cover story, Tyler. The family business angle that made him seem trustworthy to clients." "That's not true, isn't it? Did you ever wonder why he handled all the client payments himself? Why he never let you or Mom see the business bank statement? Why he claimed the company was struggling while buying expensive personal items?" Tyler didn't answer, but I could see him thinking, maybe for the first time, about patterns he'd been too close to notice. "Zoe, what happens if he goes to prison?" "Then he goes to prison, and Mom figures out how to rebuild her life without someone who's been lying to her for years. And you figure out how to support yourself without depending on a criminal enterprise disguised as a family business. And I finish my degree and my research project, and build a career that doesn't depend on anyone who thinks stealing from their own family is acceptable." Tyler stood there for another minute, looking like he wanted to say something else but couldn't find the word. Finally, he walked back to his car without another word. I watched him drive away and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Tyler wasn't a bad person, just someone who'd been raised to think that family loyalty meant never questioning destructive behavior. He'd probably spend years trying to figure out how to function in a world where actions have consequences, and enablers don't get rewarded for their silence. That afternoon, I had another meeting with Dr. Vance to review my research progress. I brought copies of my interviews with victims, the timeline analysis I'd been developing, and preliminary conclusions about the psychological factors that had enabled Dad's escalating criminal behavior. "Your work is becoming quite comprehensive," she said, reviewing my notes. "Have you considered presenting this research at an academic conference? Do you think it's ready for that level of scrutiny?" I think it's exactly the kind of real-world application of criminal psychology theory that academic conferences need to see. Too much research in this field is purely theoretical. Your work demonstrates how these theories apply to actual criminal behavior. When you put it that way, it sounds almost worth what my family has been through. Zoe, your family's trauma doesn't become worth something because you're studying it academically, but your research might prevent other families from experiencing similar trauma. That's valuable regardless of whether it justifies what you've been through. Sometimes I feel guilty about being so analytical about something so personal. That's normal, but consider this. Your analytical approach is probably protecting you from trauma that might otherwise be overwhelming. Academic objectivity can be a form of emotional self-preservation. That evening, I was working on my research notes when I got a call from Stephen Rodriguez, the criminal defense attorney Mom had hired to represent Dad. Ms. Brennan, I understand you've been conducting research on your father's case. Academic research, yeah. I'd like to discuss the possibility of you testifying as a character witness during his sentencing hearing. I almost dropped the phone. You want me to testify on his behalf? Your perspective as his daughter, combined with your academic expertise in criminal psychology, could provide valuable context for the court about your father's character and the circumstances that led to his criminal behavior. I thought about the timeline I'd constructed, showing 2 years of systematic theft and deception. I thought about the families he'd stolen from, the workers he'd stiffed, the way he'd used my grandmother's final gift as seed money for criminal enterprise. Mr. Rodriguez, I don't think you understand what my research has revealed about my father's character. What do you mean? I mean that my academic analysis of his behavior shows a pattern of calculated deception and systematic financial abuse spanning multiple victim categories over several years. If I testified honestly about my research findings, it wouldn't help his case. There was a long pause. Ms. Brennan, surely you understand that your father's actions, while legally problematic, were motivated by financial stress and poor decision-making rather than criminal intent. Ms. Rodriguez, my research indicates exactly the opposite. The timeline and escalation patterns suggest criminal intent, strategic planning, and deliberate victimization of multiple trust relationships. You're saying you won't testify on your father's behalf. I'm saying that if I testified honestly about what my research has revealed, your client would probably prefer that I not testify at all. After I hung up, I sat staring at my laptop screen, at months of research that had systematically dismantled every assumption I'd ever had about my father's character. The man I'd grown up thinking was responsible and ethical had actually been a criminal who'd spent years planning and executing a fraud scheme that had destroyed multiple families' financial security. But somewhere in that destruction, I'd found something unexpected. Clarity. For the first time in my life, I understood exactly who my father was, and exactly what I needed to build for myself to avoid ever being vulnerable to that kind of betrayal again. The research project that had started as academic revenge had become something else entirely, a roadmap for understanding how people rationalize harmful behavior and a guide for building relationships based on transparency rather than trust. 6 months later, I was standing in front of a packed auditorium at the Pacific Coast Criminal Psychology Conference, looking out at an audience of professors, graduate students, law enforcement officers, and legal professionals. My presentation was titled Financial Predation in Family Systems, a case study in trust exploitation and victim response patterns. Traditional research on financial crimes within families focuses primarily on elder abuse or domestic violence contexts. I began, clicking to my first slide. However, there's a significant gap in understanding how financial predators exploit parental authority and family trust structures to victimize their own children and extended network. I had practiced this presentation dozens of times, but standing here in front of experts in criminal psychology, I felt the weight of what I was sharing. This wasn't just academic theory anymore. This was real data about real harm done to real people, including myself. The subject of this case study, engaged in systematic financial fraud across multiple victim categories over a 2-year period, I continued, advancing to a timeline slide that showed the escalation of criminal behavior. What makes this case particularly relevant to current research is the way the subject used family relationships and parental authority to normalize financial boundary violations, before expanding to external victims. A hand shot up in the audience. Dr. Elizabeth Chen from Oregon State University. Ms. Brennan, can you elaborate on what you mean by normalizing financial boundary violations? The subject began by establishing a pattern of unilateral financial decision-making within the family structure, claiming business expertise that other family members lacked. This created a dynamic where questioning financial decisions was framed as disrespectful or ignorant, rather than reasonable oversight. I clicked to the next slide, showing a progression of financial control tactics. Once this pattern was established within the family, the subject was able to expand the same manipulation techniques to external victims, using his reputation as a family man and business owner to establish trust before exploiting it. Another hand. What role did family members play in enabling this behavior? It was a hard question, but one I'd been prepared for. Family enablement occurred primarily through information isolation and loyalty expectation. The subject's spouse and children were systematically excluded from business financial information, while being expected to support his decisions without question. This created a situation where family members couldn't recognize warning signs, because they lacked access to the data that would have revealed problematic patterns. I clicked to my next slide, showing the psychological profile I'd developed. What's particularly interesting from a criminal psychology perspective is how the subject rationalized his behavior. Internal family theft was justified as parental authority over family resources. External theft was justified as business necessity due to fabricated financial stress. The subject created elaborate narrative frameworks that allowed him to maintain his self-image as a responsible family man while systematically betraying the trust of everyone who depended on him. Dr. Martinez from Portland Community College raised her hand. Have you had any contact with the subject since beginning this research? The subject has attempted contact through family members and legal representatives, primarily requesting that I cease research activities or testify on his behalf during legal proceedings. These requests have been consistent with the manipulative patterns documented throughout the research period. And your response? Academic research doesn't stop because the subject finds the conclusions uncomfortable. If anything, the subject's attempts to control the narrative around his criminal behavior provide additional data about his psychological approach to authority and manipulation. There was a murmur of appreciation from the audience. These were people who understood that criminal behavior doesn't become less criminal because it occurs within family structures. I clicked to my conclusion slide. This case study suggests that financial crimes within family systems often serve as testing grounds for larger criminal enterprise. The psychological frameworks that allow someone to rationalize stealing from their children are the same frameworks that enable stealing from clients, employees, and community members. Early intervention in family financial abuse might prevent escalation to broader criminal behavior. What does early intervention look like in practice? Asked someone from the back. Financial transparency requirements within family systems, clear documentation of designated funds, like educational savings, legal protections for beneficiaries of family trusts and savings accounts, and most importantly, cultural changes that reframe financial oversight as responsible stewardship, rather than disrespectful questioning of authority. After the presentation, I was surrounded by researchers and practitioners wanting to discuss applications of my findings. Sarah Kim, from the University of Washington, approached with a proposition that would change my academic trajectory completely. Ms. Brennan, I'm developing a research program focused on financial crimes against vulnerable populations. Your work on family systems abuse is exactly the kind of real-world application we need. Would you be interested in pursuing graduate school with our program? I thought about the last 6 months, the way my research had evolved from personal vindication to academic contribution. What would that look like? Full funding, research assistantship, and the opportunity to expand this work into a comprehensive study of trust exploitation across different relationship categories. We're particularly interested in your methodology for analyzing criminal behavior from the victim's perspective. Dr. Kim, I'd be very interested in discussing that further. As the conference wound down, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me here. A year ago, I'd been a high school student planning for college with money my grandmother had carefully saved. Now I was a published researcher with graduate school opportunities and a thesis that was being cited by experts in criminal psychology. The drive back to Portland gave me time to process everything that had happened. When I pulled into my apartment complex, I was surprised to see Mom's car in the parking lot. She was sitting on the steps outside my building, looking older and more tired than I remembered, but also somehow more solid, like she'd been carrying weight for so long that setting it down had changed her entire posture. "Hi, Zoe." "Hi, Mom. This is unexpected. I wanted to talk to you about something. Can we go inside?" I led her up to my apartment, which still looked like a research center with papers and timelines covering most surfaces. Mom looked around at the organized chaos of my academic work. "This is what you've been working on." "Part of it. I just presented my findings at a criminal psychology conference. Several universities are interested in my research." Mom picked up one of my timeline charts, studying the progression of Dad's criminal behavior laid out in clinical detail. "It's strange seeing your own life analyzed like a case study," she said quietly. "I know it probably feels impersonal, but Mom, this research is helping people understand how these crimes develop and how to prevent them." "I'm not criticizing it, Zoe. Actually, I wanted to thank you." I wasn't sure I'd heard her correctly. "Thank you for what?" "For being brave enough to tell the truth when no one else would. For refusing to pretend that what Marcus did was normal or acceptable." She set down the timeline and looked directly at me. "I spent 30 years making excuses for behavior that I knew was wrong because I thought that's what family loyalty meant." "Mom, let me finish. I've been going to counseling since the arrest, trying to understand how I missed so many warning signs, how I enabled so much harmful behavior. Your research, the newspaper articles, even this apartment full of evidence, it's helped me see patterns I was too close to recognize." She sat down on my couch, looking around at the life I'd built for myself. "Your father pled guilty last week. He's going to prison for 3 years. I felt something shift inside me, not relief exactly, but a kind of completion. How do you feel about that?" Sad for the man I thought he was, angry at the man he actually turned out to be, but also for the first time in years I feel like I can breathe. "What will you do now?" "I'm selling the house. Most of the money will go to restitution for his victims, but there should be enough left for me to start over somewhere smaller." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I was hoping maybe we could have dinner sometimes, if you're willing." I thought about family loyalty, about the difference between enabling harmful behavior and supporting people who were trying to change. "I'd like that, Mom. And Zoe, I'm proud of what you've accomplished. Your grandmother would be proud too." That evening, after Mom left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by months of research materials. Tomorrow I would start packing them up, preparing to move to the University of Washington for graduate school. The case study that had begun as academic revenge had become the foundation for a career in criminal psychology. My phone buzzed with a text from Kira. "Saw the conference live stream. You were amazing. How does it feel to be a published researcher?" I looked around my apartment, at the evidence of systematic financial crimes that had destroyed my family's stability but created my academic future, at research that had started as a way to understand my father's betrayal but had become a tool for preventing other families from experiencing similar trauma. "It feels like justice," I typed back. "Not the kind where someone gets punished, but the kind where something good comes from something terrible." A few months later, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. The return address showed the name of a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a check for $8,407 and a note explaining that it represented my portion of the asset recovery from Dad's criminal case. Apparently, the Mustang had been sold as part of the restitution process, along with other personal property he'd purchased with stolen funds. I stared at the check for a long time. $847, less than what Grandma Helen used to contribute to my college fund in a single year, a tiny fraction of what Dad had stolen from me and dozens of other victims. But it wasn't really about the money anymore. I deposited the check and used it to fund a small scholarship at Pacific Northwest University for students studying criminal psychology. The scholarship description read, for students who demonstrate academic excellence in understanding how trust relationships can be exploited and how victims can reclaim agency through education and research. The first recipient was a young woman whose family had been victimized by financial fraud. In her application essay, she wrote, "I want to understand how people rationalize harming the people who trust them most, so I can help other families recognize warning signs before it's too late." Reading her essay, I realized that my research had accomplished something I'd never intended when I started documenting my father's crimes. It hadn't just helped me understand what had happened to my family, it had created a framework for preventing it from happening to others. 6 months into graduate school, I was working late in the research lab when I got an email that made me pause. The subject line read, "Scholarship recipient up." The young woman who'd received the scholarship I'd established had completed her first research project, a study of financial abuse recognition training for teenagers. Her preliminary findings suggested that education about financial manipulation could significantly improve young people's ability to identify and report family financial abuse. I forwarded the email to Dr. Vance with a note, "Thought you'd be interested to see how the research is expanding." She replied within an hour, "This is exactly why academic work matters, Zoe. Your personal trauma has become a tool for social change." I printed out her email and pinned it to my office wall, next to my timeline of Dad's crimes and the newspaper article that had started everything. They hung there together like chapters in a story about how pain can become purpose if you're willing to do the work of transformation. That night, I called Mom to tell her about the scholarship recipient's research project. "It sounds like your work is making a real difference," she said. "I hope so, but Mom, even if it doesn't change anything for anyone else, it changed everything for me." "How so?" I looked around my graduate student office, at the research materials that had become my life's work, at the academic future I'd built from the ruins of my father's betrayal. I learned that being victimized doesn't have to mean staying a victim, that understanding why something happened can be more powerful than just surviving it, and that sometimes the best revenge is refusing to let someone else's choices define your future. That's very wise, sweetheart. It's very expensive wisdom, but I guess some lessons are worth what they cost. After we hung up, I returned to my research notes, working on a paper about long-term outcomes for family financial abuse victims. The data suggested that victims who pursued education and built independent support systems showed significantly better psychological outcomes than those who remained dependent on the family systems that had harmed them. I added a note to my conclusions. Academic analysis of personal trauma can serve as both a coping mechanism and a prevention tool. When victims become researchers, they transform their understanding of their experiences from personal failure to systemic problem, creating opportunities for both healing and social change. It was past midnight when I finally closed my laptop and prepared to leave the office. Tomorrow I would present my latest research to a committee of professors who were considering my proposal for a doctoral program, focused on trust exploitation and victim empowerment. Walking across campus in the quiet darkness, I thought about the trajectory that had brought me here. From a teenager whose college fund was stolen by her father to a graduate researcher whose work was being cited by experts in criminal psychology. From a victim of financial abuse to an advocate for other victims. From someone whose family had defined her as expendable to someone who had defined herself as essential. The Mustang was long gone, sold to pay restitution to Dad's victims. The man who'd bought it for his midlife crisis was serving his time in prison. But the research that had emerged from that crisis was still growing, still helping people understand how trust gets exploited and how victims can reclaim their power. In the end, Dad had been right about one thing: I had built something that no one saw coming. Just not the quiet, compliant daughter he'd expected. Instead, I'd built a career, a voice, and a purpose that grew stronger every time someone tried to silence it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.